Greetings, Startup Nation. Thank you for having us, and we're here to talk about our new book, Competing Against Luck, the story of innovation and customer choice, which we were lucky enough, Taddy and I were lucky enough to work with Clayton Christensen, Harvard Business School professor on. And we're really excited about the idea, and we want to share with you a little bit about what the book's about and our own enthusiasm for it. So, Taddy, you start it. What's interesting about the idea that we have in this book? You've worked in innovation for such a long time. What's new and exciting about what we have to say here?
Yeah, and I guess, is it new? It's in some ways it's actually old, in the sense we've been working on these ideas for over a decade, but it's taken us that long to really get to truth about the story that we wanted to tell or aspired to tell, which was really a deeper understanding of what causes successful innovation. And I think at least what Clay and I have talked about probably since he and I first wrote about jobs theory, which is the core of this, over a decade ago, with Intuit Scott Cook, was can we develop a theory that's truly predictive and explains why certain innovations fail or succeed? And it's just taken us that long to get the fact base strong enough and then build up the story so we could share this book. So it's a new book and new ideas, but it's been in the works like a lot of, I think, important intellectual creations for quite a period of time. I think why this is so exciting to entrepreneurs and folks starting businesses, and I spent a lot of time working with entrepreneurs, particularly in emerging markets, is that historically there's been this conscious or unconscious assumption that innovation is inherently risky and uncertain, and it's only for the kind of the crazy or the incredibly risk tolerant who would like start a business, whether that's as a true startup or within a large corporation. And so what we were always motivated by is that risk kind of an inherent law of nature, or can we understand those causal drivers in some way and actually make innovation, if not a perfectly mechanical and predictable science, a much more predictable discipline?
Let me kind of just ask you a couple questions to break down. People may know Clay Christensen best for his theory of disruptive innovation, and that's become almost a battle cry for entrepreneurs. Sort of disrupt. You want to be the disruptor. Die, exactly, disrupt or die. You want to be the disruptor, and it's very exciting to think that you can see a chink in an incumbent's armor, and you can find a product or service that's going to undercut them and put you on top.
You bet.
The idea of this book, though, is that that's not enough. It's okay to want to be a disruptor, but how do you know what product or service to create or build? So if people think of Clay for a disruption, what is the importance of this idea as a companion to it? Because most people think disruption is a strategy. It's not really, right? That doesn't tell you how to grow.
Yeah, and I don't want to put words in Clay's mouth, but since he's not sitting here, I will. But one of the things that Clay says is that disruption is really a theory for competitive response, right? So if you're thinking about developing a new business and you want to exploit asymmetries of economic incentive vis-a-vis established players, right? So the last thing, those are fancy words, but what it really means is, you don't want to pick a bar fight with someone who's much bigger than you are, right? Because you're going to lose. And so what disruption helps you do is helps you find a foothold in a marketplace where established players are unlikely to launch a hostile response and squish you like a bug. So while it does help you predict what established players are likely to do, and it helps established players identify potential vulnerabilities where they might be dismissive of opportunities and therefore think, hey, wait a minute, where might disruption of our existing business lie? So it's useful in both of those dimensions. What disruption doesn't do is it doesn't provide a theory for growth. So it doesn't actually help you, once you've identified a disruptive footing, to say, okay, so what's the right solution that I should bring to market that I can predictably expect customers to buy and pull into their lives and use? And that's where jobs theory intersects very nicely with disruption, because it does provide a theory for growth. And I think that's why we're so excited about this theory.
Now, if I'm an average would-be entrepreneur, an existing entrepreneur, I might hear the word theory and glaze over and think it's from, Harvard campus. Of course, it's some ivory tower thing. What does theory really mean? Why is it important to have a theory for growth as opposed to just a good idea? What's the difference?
Right. Now, I think and theory often gets associated with theoretical or hypothetical or abstract or academic, and you quickly kind of get lost in the realm of the impractical and largely academic or irrelevant. But theory is simply a statement of what causes what under specific circumstances. And so the irony is that while managers and entrepreneurs are often dismissive of theory, they're actually heavy consumers of theory, in the sense that anytime we are basing decisions or taking actions with some degree of assumption about future events or the consequences of our actions, there's always a theory implicitly embedded there, right? Or sometimes explicitly, in terms of what's likely to cause what based on this decision. And so one of the things that Clay likes to say is nothing in many ways is more practical and useful than having valid theory, because it is valid theory that allows us to take actions with confidence as to what the likely consequences of those decisions will be. And so having actually a theory that allows us, in the context of creating new growth businesses, to say, okay, how can I leverage the principles of this theory to construct my business so that I can expect customers to actually buy and use my solution? If you can harness that in your entrepreneurial activities, boy, wouldn't that be wonderful to dramatically de-risk your innovation efforts. One of the things that I say to many of my clients is that we should all be doing much better in our innovation activities, not just a little better, much better, because innovation is still practiced like it's a hit or miss endeavor, and that it really is luck that determines success and failure. And what we've been able to show through our research is that nothing could be further from the truth.
So the core insight of our book is based around the concept, the theory that people just don't go around buying products or services because they're a 50-something-year-old white woman who lives in the suburbs of Boston. That there's nothing about who I am, the demographic, even the psychographic of who I am, that is going to predict what I'm going to buy.
That's right.
That instead they hire, we use the language hire, a product or service to help them solve a job to be done, something they've been struggling to accomplish or achieve. Explain that a little bit more. What do we mean by a job to be done?
Yeah, I think at its core, when we think about the way that, and I think the subtitle of the book is important, the story of innovation and customer choice. The word story is well chosen, which is that products are purchased and used in the flow of daily life, whether that's our personal lives or our business lives. Ultimately, it's individual people who make the decision to purchase and use a particular product. And so when we think about the dynamics of purchase and use, what we see is that the relevant unit of analysis is not a demographic or personal attributes, but it really is the specific circumstance. And when we start to think about the circumstance in which a person makes that decision and buy and use a product, we're on the right track, right? Because typically, just as you suggested, Karen, when companies go out and sort of begin their innovation journeys, they look out and they might look at demographic data like you just identified, or they'll grab onto some trend data, or they might have some fabulous whiz-bang technology that they're excited about turning into something and commercializing, or maybe a fourth form of an innovation guide or roadmap can be offered by what competitors or other companies seem to be doing out there. And while it's useful to have all that information, none of that data, whether it's data about potential customers or about technology or trend data or what other companies are doing, none of those sources are actually predictive or explanatory of why a particular person purchases and uses a product. But the value code that does contain that information as to what causes someone to do something is really resident in that circumstance, right? In the story, the narrative flow of a person in a place struggling to make progress. And if I can just push on that for one more second, when you make the circumstance the essential unit of your innovation work, rather than the customer or the demographic unit or the technology, what inevitably happens is we realize that people are pulling products into their lives, hiring them, as we say, to enable progress. And you can find people give lots of definitions of what innovation is or might be. But what we find quite conclusively is that innovation in many ways are simple things. Innovations are new offerings that enable people to make progress in their lives.
So innovation doesn't necessarily have to be fancy new technology.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because, and as you know, I write this report for Nielsen every year on innovation in the consumer packaged goods industry. And it highlights the most successful new products every year. And one of the regular or recurring refrains we hear from senior executives of client firms is, well, that doesn't look that exciting, or, well, that's...
What's an example of a product that was a breakthrough innovation on your report?
Well, I mean, some of the ones that you and I have spoken about that are funnier, Sargento ultra thin, sliced cheeses,
yes.
right? Or Meow Mix Tender Centers cat food, Tidy Cat's lightweight cat litter, Depends silhouette adult undergarments, International Delight iced coffee.
So pick
Dole chopped salads.
Pick one of those and explain the job to be done that caused them to be so successful. Maybe pick iced coffee. A lot of people.
You like iced coffee?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we can talk. And that's the fun thing is that I like to say to people like, well, you don't have to take my word for it. We've actually we've published about 32 now published case studies of these individual successes. And before I answer your iced coffee, the interesting thing about those stories is very different companies, different brands, some new brands, some established brands, small companies, startup companies like Bai, the Enhanced Waters, or Skinny Pop, or big established companies like a Unilever or a Nestle or a P&G. And yet, when you read these stories of these successful initiatives, those fundamental building blocks that are the true drivers of their success, you'll see jobs theory at work in every single one of them. In other words, there's a person in a place struggling to make progress or create a desired experience, and they pull that product into their lives to enable that desired experience. But anyhow, back to your question and the example around iced coffee. So again, small, medium-sized company based in Colorado called White Wave. And some folks might know White Wave for their very successful line of silk, soy, and then almond milks. They also have a line of organic dairy products under the Horizon name. But they were looking several years ago for how can we expand our successful foothold in refrigerated beverages? And so they were looking at non-alcoholic beverages broadly and what was going on. And boy, there was a lot of stuff going on in coffee generally. And so they did a little bit of general trends and forces and factors exploration. And one of the interesting things that popped up was 70% of coffee is still consumed at home. Despite the coffee cafe revolution, still a lot of it's consumed at home. The other thing that they discovered was that while people did love their coffee shops, there was a real difference in terms of how folks evaluated their on-premise experience versus their to-go experience. So you and I wanted to go and relax and sit down at the Dunkin' Donuts or the Caribou or the Starbucks and have a coffee and spend an hour or two. We quite like that experience, and we feel like we're paying a fair value for what we're getting there, which is much more than the coffee.
The atmosphere, feeling cool for a while, sitting there, watching people come and go. Exactly.
Then you feel like, okay, I'm getting all this extra stuff. Paying $4 doesn't seem like a total ripoff. In the context of like getting an hour of good time together. But the to-go experience, the value equation really shifts, and if I don't want to be at the coffee shop, I want to be somewhere else, and then it feels inconvenient. Gosh, I hate waiting that darn line. And then I gotta go over there, and they're calling me funny names, and I go out and I bang into the door and spill my coffee. Or what's happened a couple times, I get 3 blocks down the street and I got the wrong one.
Right.
And on and on. So the to-go experience turns out to be the value equation is kind of upside down.
Right.
And so these researchers at Whitewave, well, that's there's something here, right? And just to sort of kind of pause on that story for a second, this is what you need to look for as an explorer or a potential or would-be innovators. These little moments of tension, where there's energy, or things aren't going well. These circumstances of struggle, we call them. And so here these people are, they're trying to make progress in their lives, but it's kind of frustrating. And boy, it's clunky and kludgy and all these bad endings to this story. And so once the researchers at Whitewave kind of immersed themselves in this struggle, one of the things they really put a finger on was, if you are trying to make iced coffee to have at home, you're in a world of trouble, right? Because just think about it. First of all, it's morning. You had to remember to make the coffee last night.
Right. And ideally you want it in the fridge because you don't want to put ice cubes in it to make it cold. It's never as good.
And if you have to make it now, it's going to gotta get it hot. They gotta get cold.
Exactly.
And even if you do remember, then you're just kind of getting started, because then you have to get the whole kind of chemistry lab out with the creams and the flavors and stuff, and you make a mess, and it takes time. You never get it so good. And so, boy, this was exciting stuff for the researcher to find. Was like, wow, the coffee house experience is lousy, and at home isn't much better. It's a different kind of disaster.
Struggle in both places. In neither place have I got a solution I like.
It's exactly right. And then this real crisp insight of like, well, if we could deliver the coffee house experience without the coffee house hassle, we'd be cooking. And so that's precisely what they did when they created the International Delight Iced Coffee, which is half-gallon refrigerated in the grocery store, ready to go. Take it home. You get up in the morning and you've got all that coffee house taste without the hassle, and it's a perfect solution that sits right on that job to be done.
What's the job to be done for iced coffee? That sounds like such a simple product to have a job. What is the job to be done that iced coffee solves?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things about iced coffee, and it gets to the branding of it, is that once the the Whitewave folks had identified this opportunity, they're like, wow, this is great, but we don't have any coffee credentials, and people are nuts about their coffee brands. You do not force Dunkin' Donuts customers, for example, to go to a Starbucks or vice versa. Because I've been involved in some research, and that doesn't go well, right?
Right.
And so people are particular, but on closer scrutiny, what the researchers found was, in the context of hot coffee, that's true, but iced coffee is actually an adult milkshake. Right? It isn't really about the coffee, and that's the way that people kind of use it.
People like me who like iced coffee. My husband says it's coffee for people who don't like coffee.
And it's exactly right, and it largely is. But you want something a little coffee-like.
You want the caffeine.
Just a tidbit.
It's a little bit of a treat.
That's
I want
right.
to get a sort of boost in my day. There's something about the treating yourself to it.
Absolutely.
It feels socially acceptable.
Well, I think that's a good point, right? Is that jobs aren't just functional, a little bit of a detour, but all of these jobs that we find that people have to be done in their lives, sure, there's some functional elements to it, but there often are social elements. I don't want to look like a slob or a buffoon in front of my friends.
I wouldn't want to walk into work with a McDonald's milkshake in my hand in the morning, right? But
sure.
It's perfectly okay to have a fancy iced coffee. That's okay.
That's exactly right. That looks socially appropriate. We've seen similar things with people not wanting to have sodas. You want to be seen with a 20-ounce or big gulp going in. But, a sparkling ice, which is essentially it's diet soda by another is totally okay. And similarly, Mountain Dew Kickstart has been able to carve out a space that is, and we could talk about that later if you want, but it's neither a carbonated soft drink or an energy drink, but it's kind of a hybrid that is acceptable in that morning transition hour. But back to finish this story on the iced coffee is what they realize is that this really is used almost like this morning adult milkshake. And furthermore, they had initially assumed we're going to have to go off and partner with someone who's got coffee equities. And once they realized that this really isn't about coffee, that's not part of the job spec, if you will, that consumers are hiring for, they turned around and they said, we own this creamery brand called International Delight. Would that resonate? And so testing that with consumers, they found that using that brand, which is not a coffee brand, actually fits really well with that particular job to be done. And so they were able to create a category that didn't even exist in the grocery store, introducing these half-gallon jugs of refrigerated iced coffee, which has turned into a terrific success. And I think the last point there is an important, which was these guys didn't set out to go find a big growing market and dive into it. When they went out and found non-consumption and found these struggling moments and realized this category doesn't exist in the grocery store, we can create the category. To the innovator, that's fabulous, right? Managers like to go measure consumption. Innovators train themselves to look for non-consumption. We often say non-consumption is innovators' gold because that's where frustration, trade-offs, and opportunity actually lives for innovation.